Namaste everyone, welcome to the another tutorial of Spring Security. So in this video, we will understand how we can implement Spring Security using the JPA. So let's start. The first step is to create the project. So let's open our browser. Let's go to Spring Initializer. Let's create the project. Let's type @quil. Let's write our JPA as a artifact name. Let's write Spring security implementation using JPA. Let's give Java 21, Spring Boot 3.2.1, which is the latest right now. Let's add some dependency. Let's add Lombok to remove boilerplate, Spring Web for the API, JPA for ORM mapping. Let's also add our H2 for our database. What else we need? Yeah, we also need a Spring security, right? The hero of our show. Let's generate it. Okay, let's save it in. So you have to unzip the file. So you will get a JPA folder itself. Now use this JPA into our IntelliJ, right? So where is it in desktop JPA? Let's open this thing. Now it has opened. It will take some time to load everything. Let's pause for that. So everything has been loaded. If you will start the application, you will see that there is an error. Let's rectify this error as we did earlier. Go to project structure, change this SDK to the 21. If you don't have a Java, if you're not seeing this error, it's fine. If you're seeing this kind of error, it means that your SDK has not been configured correctly. So if you will see now, you are seeing the auto-generated security password, right? So our application is working fine. Now let's do all the setup that is required. The first thing is to make the database, right? So let's make the database. Let's go to main resources and application properties. Let's change it to YAML file, YAML. Okay, there is a dot there. Okay, let's open this file. Let's add first thing here that I want to see the h2 console, right? So spring dot h2 console enabled. So this thing is here, h2 console enabled true, right? What else we need? Let's create a data source. Let's use the URL. Let's have JDBC database, JDBC type of database of H2, and let's have the name of @quilldb. Also, let's have the username SA. Let's have the password, nothing, and let's have the driver class name, which should be org_h2 driver. Okay, it's fine. Now let's also for the ORM mapping that we are using JPA, right? So let's configure that also. DDL Alto create drop. So it says that like, hey, whenever this application starts, let's delete everything and create a new. Okay. And now let's also add database platform, and we have Hibernate, right? Hibernate dialect. So now everything looks correct. I also want to add show SQL to true, so that like whenever there is any changes in our database, it reflects. So till now everything is fine, right? Now let's add user to this. Let's go to Java. Let's create a entity called user entity. Oops, sorry. Let's create a package called entity. Let's create a file called user entity. So for logging, whatever you required, you will keep it here. Let's say that like, hey, it's entity. Let's give a table name, uh, name, users. If you are not giving this, so by default, it will take this as a table name. Okay. So let's create a data for getters and setters, and let's also add a no constructor. Now let's add a ID for this table, right? So long ID, let's give it as the ID. Also, we want to generate it automatically. Uh, Also, let's add a private string username. You can give email whatever you want to. So I'm just writing username here. Private string password. Also write private string roles. So it can be multiple roles, right? So there can be a user, there can be role of admin, there can be role of manager. These roles can exist, okay? And one person can have all these roles or some of them, right? Okay, now let's create the repo as well. Repo. Now let's Java class user repo. So it is not a class, it is what? It is an interface. Interface which extends JPA repository. Extends JPA repository of type what? Of type user entity, and which has long as ID, right? So now let's also annotate it with repository so that it knows that like it is here. Let's remove this thing because it is an error, right? A user entity. Okay, now we have user entity and user repo. Let's add the user to this using what? Using command line runner. So what command line runner does is before starting the application, it executes whatever we give it in this, right? So let's add the value here. So create a bin, command line runner, command line, command line runner. Let's where we need to add the value in the user repo, right? So let's take this parameter, user repo. Let's return what? Let's return args. So what we need to do here is we just need to create a user entity. User, suppose we are just creating a manager as a user, right? And so new user entity, let's give manager dot set username, manager dot set password. Let's give him password. Also manager dot set roles. Let's give roles roles manager. Let's also create one admin. Let's create this thing as an admin, and let's copy this admin 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 username is admin, and he has a role of manager as well as admin. So it is role, not roles, sorry. Okay. Now we have everything here. Okay, now let's add this thing into our user repo. So user repo dot save all list of list of what? List of manager as well as admin. So we are going to add these two into our DB. Now I think everything should look fine. Once we restart the application, let's see that like if we are able to see any inserts there or not. So we are doing the inserts, but can we see the H2 console? Let's see H2 console. Uh, let's give uh, user and the default password which is there. You can see where is the default password. Here is the default password. Okay, okay, let's connect. You are not able to see, right? Okay, so let's configure something so that we will be able to see our H2 console, right? So for that configuration, we need to go to our again security config, and in the security config, we will have to configure so that to enable whatever the things which is coming in the slash H2 console, it should be displayed. So let's go there. Okay, let's create a new package config. Let's create a file called security config. Let's say that like, hey, what were the HTTP requests that we are going to send? Uh, we will be configuring it here. Let's configuration, not cross origin, configuration. Okay, now let's start the configuration. So let's create a bean, security filter chain. Okay, security filter chain, security filter chain, and let's secure our HTTP endpoint, which throws some exception. If we are not going to write that, then it will give error when we are writing or like configuring our HTTP. Okay, so return HTTP security. Let's authorize request. Let's configure now, and we will say that, hey, whenever you see any kind of request matcher, that is and path request matcher, whenever you see uh, any request starting with suppose h2 console, h2 console, don't do anything and permit it all, permit all. But whenever you see any other request, just authenticate. Okay, so now we have already set for the authentication. One more thing that we need to do is CSRF. We need to disable the CSRF for our h2 console. Let's do that. CSRF, CSRF, because it affects our application, right? Sometimes it happens. So CSRF dot ignore request matcher, same thing, and path request matcher dot and matcher. What we need to disable it for? Console, right? We need to disable it for h2 console. Now CSRF is also done. One more thing we need to do, we need to, because the database tables and all, it comes under the frame, so we need to disable that also, the securities from there also. So headers, generally this thing you will not write in our prod, because there we will be connecting with the Postgres, not with the h2, right? So let's yeah, let's search headers. Let's add headers, headers dot frame. What is wrong? Okay, headers. Come on, head. Why? Headers. Ah, come on. Dots frame option with defaults. With defaults, let's import the static one. Okay. Uh, Customizer with defaults, let's disable it. Disable it. And last of the all, if form login is available, uh, if form login is available, then use that. Otherwise, use HTTP login. HTTP basic with defaults, and let's build our security. One more thing is there, if you will see the password that we are adding, like in our database, it is not encrypted. Okay, let's first try this. Let's restart this application. Okay, no error. Let's open, let's refresh it, let's connect. Yeah, you are able to see the tables, right? But if you will see, the passwords are not encrypted. Let's encrypt our password. User entity, let's go to our security config. Let's say that like, hey, uh, password encoder, password, password encoder. Let's encrypt our password with bycrypt password encoder. Now let's use that in our when we are encoding the password. So let's use that bin password encoder, password encoder. Let's use that here. Password encoder dot encode. Okay, now it has been encoded. Let's copy it, paste it here. Let's restart the application. Now, if you will see, the password will be encoded here. Let's connect now. We'll select user. The passwords are encoded. Okay. Now let's create some APIs. So now go to the controller package, controller. Let's write a user controller. Let's say that hey is REST controller. Let's do a request mapping for anything coming like a API. Now let's create some APIs. Okay. So the first API which we are going to create can be accessed by anyone. Okay. So let's create an API which is going to be anyone can access it. So public response entity, and let's put a question mark. It says that like any kind of response is fine. Get test API. Let's do it the return type for this response entity dot okay. Okay, everything is fine. We will just say that anyone can access me. Okay, so we have this API. Let's also add few more APIs which will be restricted. So which will be restricted to whom? Which will be restricted to these users, right? Role of manager and role of admin. For that, one thing you need to do is you need to also add enable method security. So what it means that like even though the complete application is being secured by this, we also want method level security that we are going to do it here. So let's add something which can be accessed only by manager, and this can only be accessed by admin. Okay, and how we will do that? We will just add a pre-authorized pre-authorized value. What it says that like hey, whatever, whenever this API request comes in, just check if it has this role or not. Has role what? Role of manager, role of manager. So if it has role of manager, it's fine. Get test API 1. Let's make it 1. Let's make it 2. Let's make it 3. Okay. So let's copy this thing, paste it here. Says that like, hey, uh, if it has role of manager, or if it has role of admin, then what you can do is then you can access both of them. Okay. So okay, now let's restart it. Let's see. Let's go and localhost 8080 and let's API, and we have any anyone. Let's see user, and see we have not configured till now, right? We're just checking for the APIs. We have not configured this roles. Now we have not added these roles to be secured, right? To be act as a username password. So we are just checking that like these APIs are secured or not. So let's see. So user, and the password is, okay, it's saying bank credentials, encoded password. Okay, so actually we have already encrypted the password, right? In here, if you will see, we have already encrypted the password. So now it is not able to decrypt it because we don't have like the encryption value for this available, right? So let's do one thing. Let's do all the configuration itself. Then we will check for the application security. Okay. So for adding that, let's go to the config. Let's add a user config. In this user config, we can change it to users. Okay, user config is also fine. Let's implement a user detail. Okay, so what it says that like, hey, you need to implement some of the methods. Let's implement these methods. Okay, now let's see what user details does. It has basically username and password, which generally by default you are going to use, and it also has a collector which is having the roles. Right, get authorities means it has roles. So we will be using our user entity these three things to map it with our these three things, which is by default, which is there. Okay. So where we were in the user config, right? So let's add now. Let's add, first thing is private final. From where we will getting the information? We will getting the information from user entity. The another thing that we could have done is basically here itself, if we could have just added user details, but we should not do that. It will clutter everything, right? So that's why I am doing it here. It is much more cleaner way to do that thing. Let's add a required argument constructor, otherwise we have to auto it here as well as create a constructor, so it's fine. Now let's add the username. First let's see what the username is. Return user entity to get username, so it will be our username. Same thing with the password. So let's write user entity dot get password. So we have username and password, right? And now we have these roles in the form of a string with commas, right? So let's add that thing here. We will say that we need to just stream the user entity dot get roles. Whatever the roles that we are going to have it here, we will just split it based on what? Split it based on comma. So once you split it, it will be converted into the form of arrays, right? Let's split it and make it in the form of arrays. You also have to tell them that like once you have splitted it, right? Once you have already splitted this value, let's me configure this thing, and you have this everything in the form of array, right? Then you need to just map it with what? With simple granted authority. Where is that simple granted authority? And now when you will create this value, it's now it will be represented as in the form of user details. Now you need to just make it to list. what it is doing is, whatever the rules that you are giving here in the form of a string, right? It is converting in the form of arrays. Now it is in the form of arrays, and we are saying that it is in the form of granted authority, right? Everything is in the form of granted authority, and we are just creating a list. Now our string list becomes a collection of granted authority, right? Everything is straightforward here, right? So once you are done with this, you need also have to add a method. Method to what? To map the values which are coming from the backend, sorry, which is coming from the front end to this, right? So let's do one more configuration. This configuration will be JPA details config. And why we are doing this is so that like we have separation of concerns. User details service. So once you have this, let's see which method it is telling. It is telling that, see, load user by username. So we are getting the username, okay, and we are loading it to our user config here. Let's see how we are doing that. Let's first add it here. Simply user repo, because we need it here, right? So private final user repo, user repo. Let's add a required argument constructor. Now in this, we just need to verify that user exists or not in our repo. So find by ID. No, we just need to create a method find by username, right? Find by username, and we will pass it the username here. So let's create this method in our user repo. So it is not user details, it is basically optional, right? Optional of user entity. So if we find it, it's fine. So let's go down here, find by username, and if it is there, then what you need to do, map it with what? Map it with users that we just created, right? User config, and we need to map it with that. And if we don't have any value, right, or else, so if we don't have the value, then what we need to do, we need to just say that like, hey, user does not exist. So new user not found exception. User username does not exist. Let's make it user this does not exist. So here what we are doing is we are finding the user, and we are saying that, hey, if whatever the user is there, if it is present there, then go and map it to user config, where we will get a particular I mean user details in the form of whatever is required for the Spring security in username, password, and well the granted authority for the same. So once you have everything, let's go to the security config. So in this security config, you just need to add it. Where is the security config? Yeah, in the security config, you just need to add that file, private final JPA user details config, user details config. So let's also add here required argument constructor, and now we are going to use this user details config instead of default one in here. So how we will add that? We will simply say after this that, hey, we are going to use user details service for our security purpose. Okay, I mean security purpose in the sense that like let's change the name, JP user detail config. Let's for our login, config JPA user details config right here. JPA user detail config. Why this thing is showing here? Could not auto wire the bean. Could not auto wire the bean. Why? Okay, so let's go there. Okay, we have not. Okay, so let's service. Okay, so basically it is a method, right? Which is, I mean, business logic, which is saying that like, hey, get the user details and map it to the granted authority and all, and return it back, right? So we are forgetting that. So once we restart now, I think every should thing should be working fine. Okay, now you don't see this thing, right? Like the default password which was coming. Let's test it out. Let's refresh everything. Let's see if data still exists in the backend or not. Connect. Let's see user run. Okay, manager and this thing is there, and it has having the admin role. Let's sign in using which API you want to go. Let's go to the manager. So let's go to the manager. For that, let's log in like admin. Okay, user account is logged. Let's manager password user account is logged. Okay, so why this thing is getting logged? Let's see. Okay, so I think I know the reason. Let's go to our this. Let's go to our user config. Okay, so yeah, here there we just need to make it true, because we are saying that like, hey, is it account expired? True. Is account non-logged? True. Is account credentials non-expired? True. And these things you need to configure when we are doing some advanced level of configuration. So let's restart this and hopefully everything should work. Let's restart. Now let's try with the admin and password. Okay, so let's try again with what? Manager API. Let's try with admin password. Okay, so we are not able to access using this. Let's check with the admin, and we are not able to access this API also. Oh, sorry, we need to access using the API slash manager, right? Okay. Why this thing messages there? Let's check our controller. Okay, message are same. So let's change to principal. This is to check that like, hey, who is like logging in. So I am manager API is accessed by, let's get principal dot get name. So who is logging in? You have this information. Okay, let's copy this, paste it here as well. Admin API. Admin API is accessed by this. Let's put here principal dot get name. Okay, so let's restart. So what we are doing basically is like this manager API, right? It is going to be accessed by only by the manager, and this admin API is going to be accessed by manager as well as admin. Okay, so let me change that. I think it is better if we copy, and yeah, this thing should be there, right? And this thing should be here. It makes more sense, right? So manager and admin can access manager API, and just admin can access admin API. Let's restart it again. So Okay, everything is done. Let's restart. Let's log in as admin. Okay, I'm not able to access manager API. I'm not able to access manager API. Why? Let's see if I'm able to access admin API admin. And what's the problem here? Has, okay, it is not has roles, has any role, has any role. Sorry. Let's restart. Okay, now again, let's log in from the admin password. So admin I can access. Let's see if I can access manager, manager, manager I can access. Now let's log out using the simple logout. This is the inbuilt feature, right? This is the inbuilt feature given in the Spring security. So let's log in as manager, password. Let's log in. Let's go to API slash admin. I'm not able to access it, right? Okay, so let's write manager. So I'm able to access it. So there it is. There is the simplest way, and actually you can use most of them in prod as well for configuring your Spring security and all. One more thing you can do is you can segregate both of them. You can segregate the security into two parts. Let's do it itself. So let's segregate these two into two parts so that like you can have multiple configuration for the security filter chain. Okay, so in this way it will be helpful for you in future. So let's comment it. Let me comment it out. Let's do it now itself. Let's, okay, uncomment it. I will just copy this thing and put it here, and here I will just write h2 console security chain, h2 console security chain, and here I will write API security filter chain. Okay, so in this you just need to say that like, hey, whatever the request is coming, let's see that like if it matches our pattern or not. So and path request matcher, let's see that like it matches the pattern of h2 console or not. If it matches the pattern of h2 console, then instead of doing all this shit, right, instead of doing this, just remove this part. Just remove this part, then you don't need this, you don't need this, then just permit everything. And yeah, you just need to you don't need any kind of I mean authorization, right? So header with form login, basic login, it is also not required. Okay, now we will see that the order of creation of this penis, it has already been right in the order of creation of this penis first. So while creating the bean, it will run this thing as first one, first priority. Let's give this thing for the priority number 2. Now we are saying here that like, hey, as we are saying here, right, like whenever it starts with h2 console, here we are saying that whenever it starts with anything called the API, let's come here. We don't even need it here because everything else we want to be secured, right? So let's put it here. Let's remove this and let's remove that. We want it to be secured using this CSRF. We don't need you. We don't need you. Uh, we need dot form login, right, with defaults. So now even if we will start, you will see that application should work. Okay, now let's go there. Let's refresh it. Admin, password, Okay, manager API is access. So everything is working fine. Why I did like this is basically, I mean, for the future purpose, whenever we have the multiple configuration where we are doing, like, suppose for the starting with the API, we want some at one place, we want Okta, suppose some API starting with in AWS, we want something different to be authorized with. So we can do in this way. Okay. So thank you guys. I hope you liked this video. I know my videos are a little bit longer than usual, but I tried to explain most of the concepts here. So yeah, please like, share, and subscribe. Bye.